Hello and welcome. Today, I'd like to talk about the idea that it's more difficult for a wealthy person to enter God's house than it is for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle. We're going to examine this metaphor. I'm going to give an example of a good wealthy person I've met in my life. We're going to look at how and when material goods can be an issue. We're going to talk about how not to judge. We're going to answer the question if you should be wealthy. So, for one to understand, this metaphor means that in the ancient times there were walled cities, and these walls would have a small opening at some point, enough to fit one person between, not enough for an invading army to get through. And this was, of course, called the eye of the needle. Now that's what was in reference of in saying it's harder to get a camel through that wall. Well, you would look at a hole the size of, roughly one person. Getting a camel through that same hole is not going to be easy, or maybe even impossible. So we're saying, what it's saying in conclusion, it's very difficult, if not outright impossible, for a wealthy person to enter God's house. So I met a wealthy person once, and I stayed in his home for a couple of nights. And I was friends with a friend of his daughter. And she invited about 6 of us over. And we just had a good time over there. Watching movies, having drinks, socializing, whatnot. We're young, in our 20s at the time. So this family, very, very wealthy, very educated, very intellectual. They were nice to us, didn't look down at us in any way, even though we had lower levels of wealth and intelligence. Treated us as equals the entire time we were in their house. Actually opened up their entire house to us. We all knew and were friends with the daughter, but we didn't know their parents at all. I've never met them. Yet they treated us very well while we were there, and just showed us a fantastic time. Good conversation, good food, good friends. From what I understand, the father owns a factory, among other things, and treats his workers well, gives them good benefits, and tries to do right by them. This, to me, is not an enemy of God. So this is a person who intelligently manages resources. So why are material goods or physical objects considered to be an issue? Well, the idea is we're in this physical realm temporarily, and we should leave this realm at some point and ascend to a higher plane of existence, that which is above the physical realm. Now, if you've spent your whole life identifying as your physical body, or the example in this video, your physical objects or lack thereof, it's going to be much harder for you to ascend to a higher level of existence, because you see yourself as nothing, as that which will return into dust given enough time. Even the pyramids, for example, they'll return to dust given enough time. We know this. Why would you identify with those things? Why would you say, I am my house, I am my car, I am these things? Well, because you may just not be thinking about it. Trying to derive happiness or self-worth through that which is nothing. And unfortunately you derive other self-worth through that which is nothing. And then of course you hate people that have more or less than you. Which is, so it causes hate because you identify with that which is nothing. So the idea is wealth is inherently not the issue. So we give an example of a good wealthy person. So they're out there. I'm sure you could give an example of a bad wealthy person. I'm not saying they're not out there. We'll just describe them as somebody who mismanages his wealth. But we all mismanage wealth, right? Poor people can mismanage wealth. Wealthy people can mismanage wealth. For you, or for what you can control, yeah, that's going to be not identifying as your stuff and not identifying others as their stuff. So that's how you could walk as equals among other people on this planet, even though there's a huge wealth disparity between people. But that's okay. You can rise above all of that and identify with the spirit and not the physical. So is it going to be harder for wealthy people to enter God's house? It can be. It can be. So if I'm trying to sell you on the idea that you're the spiritual and not the physical, it's going to be harder for you to see past all the physical if, let's just say your body's very young and beautiful and you've got a lot of material possessions, just wealth. Yeah, you have a lot more to look past. It's going to be a lot easier for me to go to somebody whose, body is not that great, and let's say they're also poor, maybe even next to homeless, their body's like breaking down and everything, and I go to them and I say, hey, don't fret, you're not your body, you're not your lack of material possessions, God sees you and I as equals. That's going to be a lot easier to sell. That's going to be a lot easier to get somebody to believe in than it is for somebody to have to look past all that they do have. So is it harder? It can be. It can be. But it doesn't have to be. And the real question is, should you give up your wealth, or should you be asking others to give up their wealth? And again, you have to answer that for yourself. So, number one, you shouldn't be asking others to give up their wealth, because that's judging others. You don't know what they're going through. But we could all ask and answer for ourselves, should we give up our own wealth? Well, is your wealth stopping you from being closer to God, i.e. the spiritual? Can you see this happening? Are you obsessed with your physical objects? Do they control every action and emotion in your life? If that is the case, you are largely rooted in the physical, and these things are destroying you. You may consider getting rid of some of them, or start by going on a long, vacation where you're just not around, so many physical objects, say a cabin in the woods or something, to get an idea of what it is living life without, all these physical things. Because we know physical things return into dust. They're nothing. They're fine. What I'm not saying is don't have them. So it's fine to have material objects as long as they're not identifying you. So I'd be a hypocrite to say don't have any material objects. Like I'm in a house right now, I'm speaking into a computer and a video and a microphone and things like that. Obviously, we do need to have stuff, like at least clothes on your body and things like that, and shelter and food, and this is all stuff, and transportation, again, stuff. So yes, we do need to have material objects. But the goal is to to not judge people for having material objects, because that's a lot of people have taken this passage as one of judgment. Well, how do you not judge? Two things you get to do to not judge. Number one, stop identifying yourself as the body and nothing. So unfortunately, when you identify yourself as a body, you identify others as their body. You see yourself as nothing, as just this physical vessel. The body is nothing but a vessel which houses my soul, spirit, and consciousness. The body will wither and die and turn into nothing. And even more so, your physical objects, certainly don't identify yourself as those things, right? I'm not very good because I don't have a nice car, or I'm really better than these people because I have such a better car. Look at me go. Right? Have a good car, don't have a good car, that's inconsequential. The point is, do you identify with that thing? Is that all you see yourself as? Is that all you see others as? And the second part of not judging is seeing God's house as open and welcome and accepting to all. So once you see God's house as open and welcome and accepting, and the fact is, well, who lives outside of God's house? Well, that's up to you. That's your own free will. You've been given free will, and you have the choice to choose to live outside of God's house. So by these two understandings of reality, it becomes almost impossible to judge, because you can no longer judge somebody based on their physical appearance or wealth or material stuff or lack thereof. Well, what's left to judge somebody by? Well, their actions. And that's certainly a lot better thing to judge somebody on than all these other things. And you're certainly not judging people in judge, jury, and execution, or in just condemning people to hell wholesale. So this huge slew of judgment is just gone. It becomes a lot harder to judge people negatively based on their actions. If you look at just their actions, which is kind of what's left after you say, well, I'm not going to judge you based on your body or your material possessions, or the fact that you're getting into heaven or not getting into heaven. So doing those things leaves you in a just fantastic position not to judge yourself and not to judge others around you. So don't take this passage, as so many have, to just wholesale judge people with wealth. Again, you're on a slippery slope. It doesn't even define what wealth is or what is wealthy. Is that the 1%? Well, the 1%, that's that's a lot of people in America, for example. That is, what are we like? If we're 350 million, what is that going to be like? 350,000 or something, or 3.5 million? Yeah, 3.5 million people. So if it's the 1%, it would be 3.5 million people you just judge and said they're going to hell. That's, don't do that. So should you be wealthy? I certainly can't answer that for you. Does God want you to be wealthy? Well, God wants you to be wealthy in the spirit, not in the physical. However, we do need people to manage wealth in a good way, right? Which helps others. So if you're asking, for wealth in order to manage wealth intelligently, i.e., let's say I want to own a factory where I treat my workers really well and give them, good living wages and good benefits and room for advancement and education, that's fantastic. Should you ask, God for wealth in that situation? Yes, you should. However, if you just want wealth for the sake of wealth, i.e. decadence, well, I wouldn't think it's a good idea to ask for God for wealth in that situation. Basically, you're ultimately, like we've said, asking to be closer to the physical realm. I would think the goal would be to get closer to the spiritual realm. And you can become closer to the spiritual realm regardless of how much or how little wealth you have. If it is your calling to to actually manage wealth for society in a good and ethical way, then yes, we need more good and ethical people managing wealth in our society. And you should definitely ask God for that. So in conclusion, wealth is not the enemy. It's just poorly defined as to what it actually is. Is wealth that which is, if you own a house, is that wealth? Should you not own a house? Should you just be homeless? Should everybody be homeless? So once you see that, I want you to see that, well, the idea is to identify with the spiritual. It's to use this reality as a stepping stone to understand yourself and to obtain a higher level of consciousness when you leave this place. That which is above the physical level of consciousness. Is wealth stopping you from doing that? I don't know. You have to ask and answer that question for yourself. I can't answer it for you. Is a certain level of wealth stopping you from doing that? No. It might be harder with more wealth to look past than it is with less wealth. But anyone can fall into the trap at any level of wealth to say, I am my things, I am nothing, I am, this computer, I'm only as good as my computer. If I have a poor computer that's several years old, I'm just not very good. I'm not a very good person. And people come to this conclusion all the time with their car, their house, or their clothes and things like that of themselves and others. So certainly don't do that, but does that mean that if you have things that you're no longer welcome in God's house? Certainly not. Not in any way, shape, or form. And we actually do need people to manage wealth in this planet. Thank you for watching the video. And as always, the purpose of these videos is to give you the tools to become closer to God on your own.